Hello, my name is Alyssa Shimomura, and my capstone presentation proposal is going to be covering my topic of storytelling and how it is used for different purposes of not just entertainment, but expression and communication. I am I am in my final years, obviously, but like here at West Oahu, I graduated from Kapolei High School. I'm a creative media student in the video game concentration. Um, and with the presentation, I'll be covering my plans for my capstone project, explaining my thesis statement, my objective and rationale for everything I did this semester, and I'm addressing the significance of the project and my research. So the thesis that I came up with in regards to storytelling, while fiction is widely accessible and easy to create, effective storytelling depends on intentional narrative choices, including purposeful detail, audience engagement, and the medium in which the story is told, and the strategic use of principles, elements, and tropes. The collective will be called tools because that's a lot of things. An author of well-written fiction knows what tools to use, how, and when. Um, Kind of like a handyman and making things. So the reason why I did all this was like to learn about the elements that make a story, the tools that would help make it well written. Stories detail characters' experiences, their events, their journeys, how they grow. But this is all like it's communicated. There are ways to strengthen them and make them more impactful, understandable, and effective in its purposes. Similarly to how word choice can completely change the tone of a paper, I learned that this semester. um, the needs of a story to get it to that effective execution will differ depending on the story's actual needs, like what the story's about and what is trying to be communicated, and like not even just that, but the purposes, whether it's just for entertainment, education, expression. And to understand all of this is what I aimed to learn and to be able to explain. For my capstone, I plan to do a project. I plan to complete a writing project for my capstone to take what I've gathered from my research, learning about these tools and how these elements in a story are used to create an effective way of entertainment and communication. Um, Once the story is finished being written, I will be handing it to a group of a group of people to read, and I will also be handing those people, once they are done reading it, to take a survey to explain what they picked up from the story, what was communicated, to basically kind of show evidence of how these tools and the use of these elements like character, setting, and story, like how they can all be used to explain specific messages or communicate different ideas. So, as for the significance, the thesis that I wrote addresses the use of narrative elements and tools, and how they can affect the effectiveness of a story and its ability to fulfill its purpose. Previously, like I mentioned, communication, education, and expression, entertainment. And after researching the elements of a story and some of the possible tools, some ways were considered and how they could be hypothetically used, like how a red herring could bolster the mystery of like a detective story where characters are trying to solve a murder, and the red herring can increase the intrigue of it, just as an example. Um, Another thing that I learned though in the research is that um, during that research, I found that knowing how to use these tools and how to properly use these elements can really affect the quality of a story. And even like stories from the same studio, like Studio Ghibli, for example, with their film adaptations, the quality can vary whether the person who's like directing it, whoever's working on it, knows how to use these ways of writing. Um, like for example, Earwig and the Witch was not as well received as Howl's Moving Castle, which is widely beloved, both produced by people at Studio Ghibli. Further research of this would be like defining and understanding how to use different narrative devices, like Chekhov's gun. Um, so part of the research that I have is this article, "Sustainable Education for Sustainable Future." Uh, the title's really long, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. Um, but in this study, it was the in this study, um, um, the sorry, what was done was taking engineering topics. In this case, it was for renewable energy, and they were using visuals and a fictional story to communicate more complex ideas. And the results of this study, there were some complications in needing to needing time and resources to prepare a lesson plan for this, but in the article, it talks about how the use of this proposed method of storytelling to explain these topics was actually pretty helpful in teaching more complex ideas, and it was almost 80% more attractive to the students as a learning method, and it was 75% more effective. Students reported being able to remember the content much easier, and it encouraged higher engagement and participation from the students, and it also promoted creativity, proving its effectiveness in education. So, in terms of my project, the target audience that I have in mind would be adults that would have an interest in fiction and writing, leaning more towards genres of fantasy and modern fantasy. People who would have interest in more theoretical or maybe philosophical topics, because those can be expressed very differently depending on the topic and the type of story used, and the symbolism and all the metaphors that can be used in writing. So with my solution, the proposed solution would be to learn about these things and basically show how effective they can be. And I do think it is something also that could be more widely taught. um, People widely make and consume fiction mainly as a form of entertainment, as we see now in movie theaters and in fictional books, video games. So much of this includes writing, so scripts for movies, dialogue for video games, interactive storytelling type of mediums like Dungeons and Dragons as a tabletop role-playing game. All of this, like, it's writing, and then books are entirely writing. So like how we want to communicate or express effectively in our speech, body language, or facial expressions and essays, as you might guess, understanding and utilizing these tools can aid in that effectiveness. And I think it is a good skill to learn. And as for my deliverable, ideally, I think it would be a 10 to 20 page fictional story utilizing specific narrative elements and devices effectively, along with an accompanying survey that will be given to all the readers, kind of to basically gauge what ideas were communicated, interpreted by the readers, to see if the narrative devices and elements were used effectively, and maybe how it can even be improved. So in terms of the process, the pre-production would be kind of mapping out like the main points of the story, what devices would best fulfill those needs and how to execute it. The during production, I would be writing all of this, making edits, figuring out what works and what doesn't, what hinders the idea I'm trying to communicate, and like what muddles it and what actually lifts the story up. And then I would be sending out in post the story and that survey to see how well it was written, to kind of learn more about how these things are used and how it can be improved, what things shouldn't be included, because it might hinder the actual storytelling and the clarity of what is being told. Thank you. That's it.